The atelier on Michigan Avenue smelled like money and restraint in equal measure. Imported silk, fresh-cut flowers, the faint chemical edge of alterations being rushed on a deadline. Celeste Vane had been standing on the elevated fitting platform for 38 minutes, while Claudine, the head seamstress, worked her way around the hem with pins clenched between her lips and the particular focused silence of a woman who had dressed Chicago's most important women for 25 years and had learned that the most important thing she could offer them was the absence of unnecessary conversation. The mirrors were everywhere, floor to ceiling angled to catch every perspective. Celeste had learned long ago not to look at all of them at once. You picked one. You focused. You controlled what you allowed yourself to see. Today she chose the mirror facing the window, where the winter light came in, flat and honest, and the Chicago skyline filled the frame behind her like something staged. The dress was extraordinary. Ivory Duchess satin, structured corset bodice, cathedral-length train, hand-stitched beading along the neckline that caught the light and threw it back in pieces. It had been designed specifically for her body, not the body someone thought she should have, the body she actually had. Full hips, strong shoulders, a silhouette that carried weight the way the women in her family always had, with a kind of architectural permanence that looked powerful in the right clothes and merely large in the wrong ones. This was the right dress. She knew it was the right dress. She just could not feel it. 3 days, she thought. 72 hours, and she would be Mrs. Adrian Morrow. The thought sat in her chest, the way a stone sits at the bottom of clear water. Visible, heavy, not quite right. Claudine said, without looking up, "You are compensating again. Your left shoulder." Celeste straightened. She looked at herself in the window mirror, dark hair pinned up in a loose test arrangement, deep brown skin against ivory satin, features her mother had always called dramatic, and her father called striking, and Adrian called in his better moments unforgettable. She had been 28 when she met Adrian Morrow at a dinner her father hosted for the combined logistics interests of 4 Midwest families. She had been 30 when he proposed on a Tuesday evening in November in her apartment with a 3-carat cushion-cut diamond in platinum and the practiced ease of a man who had rehearsed the moment until it felt spontaneous. She had said yes. She had meant it. She thought she had meant it. What she remembered now, standing on the platform in $60,000 of ivory silk, was not the proposal, but the dinner the previous month at the elder Morrow's house. The long table, the good wine, the careful conversation of people who understood that everything said in that room carried weight. And Adrian, midway through the main course, looking at her across the table and saying, "You are going to be formidable when you take over your father's operation." The way he said it, the particular satisfaction in it, the way his eyes moved just briefly to his father at the head of the table. Not to her. The sentence had been about her. The look had been for someone else. She should have heard it then. She had filed it as a compliment. Claudine said the bustle can still be adjusted. The weight distribution on the train has been troubling me since Tuesday. It is beautiful, Celeste said. You did beautiful work. I need 5 minutes. Claudine read the room with the efficiency of long practice and disappeared through the curtained doorway without another word. The sound of sewing machines resumed somewhere deeper in the building. Celeste exhaled. She had grown up in this city, understanding that Chicago had its visible surface, all architecture and commerce and civic pride, and beneath that surface it had another city entirely, one that ran on different rules. Her father, Raymond Vane, controlled 6 port facilities, 31 warehouses, and a logistics network that moved cargo through the Midwest the way a circulatory system moved blood, constantly, invisibly, critically. Vane Shipping was publicly a legitimate enterprise. Raymond sat on civic boards, attended charity galas, shook hands with politicians who knew better than to ask too many questions. What those politicians understood without being told was that the shipping lanes Raymond Vane controlled were used by people whose business required a certain amount of discretion, and that this arrangement had made everyone involved very comfortable for a very long time. Celeste had grown up understanding this. She had grown up understanding a lot of things that were never discussed directly. That certain men who came to dinner with her father were not merely business associates. That certain conversations paused when she entered a room. That her father's handshakes sometimes lasted longer than handshakes needed to, and that what passed between the palms in those extra seconds was obligation, agreement, and the particular weight of power acknowledging power. She had never been afraid of that world. She had been trained for it in the careful way that daughters of men like Raymond Vane were trained, educated at the right schools, introduced to the right families, taught to read a room, hold her tongue, and understand that in certain circles a woman's value was calculated through a specific and unforgiving arithmetic. Adrian Morrow had seemed for 2 years like the answer to an equation she hadn't known she was solving. She stepped down from the fitting platform, careful with the train, and walked toward the small lounge where her coat and bag waited. Her phone had 14 unread messages from the wedding coordinator, 3 from her mother about the rehearsal dinner seating chart, and 1 from Adrian sent 40 minutes ago that said simply, "Running late? Don't wait up." He had been running late for 3 weeks. She set the phone face down on the low table and poured herself a glass of water and stood at the small window that looked not onto Michigan Avenue, but onto the narrow service corridor between buildings, delivery carts, a man in coveralls leaning against the far wall, the real infrastructure of elegance doing its work out of sight. She heard voices, not the seamstresses. These were coming from the short hallway that connected the atelier's back rooms to the building's service stairs, where there was a small alcove the staff sometimes used for calls they didn't want overheard. She was not trying to listen. Her body understood something was wrong before her conscious mind caught up, the way bodies do, going very still, processing before thinking. Adrian's voice. She recognized it at the cellular level, the way you recognized music you had heard so many times it lived in you without your permission. She has no idea, he said. She never has any idea. A pause. Come on, you have seen the photographs. She is not exactly. Another pause, and then his laugh, the particular quality of it. She had loved that laugh once. Stripped of context now in this narrow corridor of expensive fabric and careful fictions, it sounded like something else entirely, something she did not have a word for yet, but that her body was already naming. A lower voice, feminine, saying something Celeste could not make out. Then Adrian again. I am handling it. 3 more days, and it is done. And then we are locked into the vein ports for the next 20 years. That is all this is. Celeste set the water glass on the windowsill with extraordinary care. She is sensitive about it, Adrian said. I have learned which buttons not to push. A pause. Her father does not know how far I have gotten into their logistics data. By the time they figure it out, the contracts will be signed, and there will not be anything anyone can do about it. The other voice closer now, intimate, in a way that had nothing to do with business. Then Adrian, clear as a struck bell. She is embarrassing to be seen with, but what she comes with is worth it. Celeste had been insulted before. She had been whispered about, looked at sideways, had opinions about her body delivered to her with the casual cruelty of people who never stopped to consider what they were doing. She had developed over 30 years a functional wall she could get behind when she needed to, not indifference. She had never been able to achieve indifference, but something that let her keep moving. What she felt right now was not the familiar bruise of that old wound. What she felt was colder than that, more structural, like something load-bearing had just given way. That is all this is. She found the ring on her finger, 3 carats cushion cut set in platinum. She had thought it was chosen with care. She had thought a lot of things. She pulled it off. Her hands were not shaking. That surprised her later. She stood for a moment looking at the ring in her palm. This thing she had worn for 8 months, this object she had allowed to mean something. Then she turned around and walked back into the hallway and pushed open the door to the back alcove. Adrian was there, and the woman from his office, whose name was Petra. Celeste had met her at 3 different events and smiled at her and thought nothing of it. Petra stood with her back against the wall and Adrian's hand against the wall beside her head, and they both looked up with the particular frozen expression of people caught in something they believed was private. Adrian's face ran through surprise and calculation simultaneously. His mouth opened. Celeste. She held out the ring. He looked at it. Something moved across his face. Not guilt, calculation. This is not what. She said don't. The word had no inflection, not anger. The voice she used when she had already made a decision and everything after was administrative. Don't tell me what this is. We need to talk about this somewhere, he said. I am talking about it here. She did not look at Petra. This was not about Petra. I heard enough. I heard you, and I understand what the last 2 years were, and I am done. Adrian ran a hand through his hair. The calculation was still running behind his eyes. She could see it. He was assessing whether this was salvageable, whether she had heard enough to matter, whether the situation could be managed. He had been managing situations his whole life. He was very good at it. Serafina, the wedding is in 3 days. I am aware of when the wedding is. She stepped forward and pressed the ring into his palm with a firm and final pressure. The way you close a door you intend to stay closed. Call it off, she said. Whatever story you want to tell is your problem. I won't be contradicting you because I won't be speaking to you. You have no idea what your father's operation is actually. I have a complete idea. She looked at him, then really looked, with the kind of direct attention she rarely gave people, because it tended to make them uncomfortable. She looked, and she saw him, the genuine him, the one underneath the tailored suit and the practiced charm and the family name that meant something in this city. She saw the smallness of him. You told her I was embarrassing, she said. You said this was business. Let that sit for exactly 3 seconds. I want you to hear this clearly, Adrian. I am not embarrassed. You are. And one day soon, when whatever you are trying to build on top of my father's work falls apart because everything built on a rotten foundation falls apart, I want you to remember that you could have chosen differently. She turned and walked out. He called her name twice. She did not stop. The car back to her apartment on the Gold Coast took 22 minutes, and she spent all of them looking out the window at Chicago going past. She did not cry. She thought she might have wanted to, in the theoretical way you sometimes want weather to break so the pressure changes. But the tears did not come. Instead, she felt a strange, stripped clean clarity. The kind that comes after a fire takes everything with it. And in the silence of that clearance, she could begin to see things she had not been able to see before. She pulled out her laptop in the back seat. Celeste had maintained a spreadsheet for 7 months, not because she had been suspicious of Adrian specifically, but because in her world you gathered threads on the families your family was doing business with. It was hygiene. It was what you did. She opened it now and looked at it not through the eyes of a woman in love, but through the eyes of a woman who worked with logistics data for a living and knew what systematic access looked like versus casual familiarity. What she was seeing was a map, a patient, methodical map of Vane Shipping's operational network, which clients used which facilities, which routes served which purposes, which contracts contained the clauses most useful to a competing organization. She was still looking at it when something else surfaced in her memory, a detail she had filed away 8 months ago and never examined. Adrian in her apartment for dinner, asking to charge his phone, using hers instead when his battery died. She remembered because he had been on it for longer than she expected and had seemed, when he handed it back, briefly distracted. She had thought nothing of it. She pulled up the photo library on her old phone, the one she kept in her bag as a backup, and scrolled back to the previous April. There, a photograph she had not taken. The east loading dock of facility number 7, shot from a specific angle at a specific height. Not the angle of a visitor on a due diligence tour. The angle of someone measuring sight lines, documenting access points. The engagement had been announced the following May. He had started before he proposed. 2 years, all of it designed. She closed the laptop and called her father. Raymond Vane answered on the second ring, the way he always answered her calls, with the alert attention of a man who understood that when his daughter called in the middle of a workday, something was happening. She said, "I need you to pull every contract and every preliminary agreement we have signed or indicated with the Morrow interests in the last 18 months. A silence. Her father was a man who had learned to process significant information without visible reaction. Even over the phone, she could hear the quality of his stillness. "That is a comprehensive request," he said. "Adrian has been accessing our logistics data, more than what would be normal for due diligence. I do not know how far in he has gotten, but I think it is further than we realized." Another silence. She heard him stand up. She knew the sound of his chair. "Are you all right?" "I am fine. I will be fine. Pull the documents before I come in. I will be there in an hour." She did not tell him about the atelier. Not yet. The details of her personal humiliation could wait. What could not wait was whatever Adrian had been doing inside their systems for the better part of a year, mapping the architecture of relationships her father had spent 3 decades building. She arrived at Raymond's West Loop offices 45 minutes later, still in the wedding dress laptop under one arm, the photograph open on her screen. Raymond was at his desk with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled to the elbows. He looked at the laptop before she spoke. He looked at the photograph. He looked at his daughter. She sat down and told him everything in the clipped, efficient order of someone who had spent the car ride organizing the information into the sequence that would take the least time to communicate. When she finished, Raymond picked up the folder she had laid on his desk and turned through the first several pages, and the silence in the room became a different kind of silence. Heavier. The silence of a man absorbing the full dimensions of a problem he had not seen coming. He said Jesus, which was something he almost never said. She said, "How long would it take to close the vulnerabilities?" He set the papers down. He looked at her with the parental attention that could never quite be absorbed into professional mode, the gaze that saw the child underneath the controlled exterior. Weeks for some of it, months for the deeper access points. She held his gaze steadily. "That is not what we need to talk about right now." He studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded and picked up his phone. And whatever he was feeling about what had been done to his daughter, he put it somewhere interior where it would stay until there was time to deal with it. That was how they operated, both of them. It was one of the most important things they had in common. It was 40 minutes later, while Celeste was cross-referencing Morrow financial disclosures against Vane port access logs, that Raymond's desk phone rang. He listened for several seconds. Then he looked across the desk at his daughter with an expression she recognized as surprise, which on Raymond Vane's face was something she had seen perhaps 4 times in her life. He said, "It is Dominic Morrow. He wants to speak with you directly." She took the phone. The voice on the other end was male, and measured with the particular careful weight of someone who chose every word before releasing it. "Miss Vane, My name is Dominic Morrow. I believe you are having a complicated afternoon, and I would like to meet with you tonight if you are available." She did not speak for 3 full seconds. She was counting. She realized afterward to make sure her voice would come out level. "Why would I meet with you?" "Because you are intelligent enough to understand that what you discovered today is the surface of something much deeper, and because you deserve to understand the full picture before you make any more decisions." A pause. "I also owe you an apology for my son's behavior and for my failure to stop him sooner." She looked at the spreadsheet on her screen. 7 months of Adrian Morrow moving quietly through her father's digital architecture, building his map, where she said, "The restaurant Dominic Morrow chose was not the kind of place that appeared in food publications or maintained a social presence of any kind. It occupied the ground floor of a building in River North that looked from the street like a private social club, which it was the kind where membership was extended by invitation only, and the invitation was not for sale at any price." Celeste knew the building. She had been inside once before, years ago, for a dinner her father had brought her to when she was 24, and being introduced to the architecture of his world. She arrived 8 minutes early. Dominic Morrow was already there. This told her something about him immediately, that he would arrive before guests to a meeting he had called, that he understood the particular power of being already present when someone walked into a room. It was a different kind of power than Adrian's. Adrian's power was performative, centered in his own need to be seen as dominant. What Dominic demonstrated by simply sitting in that chair when she walked through the door was more compressed than that, more quiet, more permanent. He rose when she entered, not a theatrical gesture, just a thing he did. She had met Dominic Morrow twice before at large family events where he had been peripheral to her attention. A powerful man in a room full of powerful men, unremarkable in that context. Looking at him now in the specific attention of a private meeting, she revised that assessment entirely. He was 52 years old, gray at the temples, with the kind of face that had been handsome in youth and had become something more interesting over time. There was a stillness to him that was not emptiness. It was the stillness of something very large that had learned not to make unnecessary movements. "Miss Vane." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Thank you for coming." "You said you owed me an apology," she said, sitting. "I would like to hear it before anything else." If he was surprised by the directness, he did not show it. "My son has been conducting himself in a manner I find deeply dishonorable. His behavior toward you, both what you overheard today and the patterns that preceded it, reflects a failure on his part that I should have addressed sooner." He paused. His eyes were dark and steady. "I am sorry for the pain that failure caused you, directly and genuinely." She studied him. The thing about apologies was that they were easy to perform and almost impossible to fake at the cellular level. The small physical tells of a person who meant something versus a person executing a social script were barely perceptible, but they were there. What she was reading in Dominic Morrow did not register as performance. "Why didn't you stop him sooner?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. And in that moment, something happened that she had not expected. The compression of him, that immense controlled stillness, developed a hairline fracture, not in his posture, not in his expression, in something underneath both, something she could see only because she was looking very carefully and because she had spent her professional life learning to read the information that people's bodies carried without their permission. What she saw was not calculation. It was the recognition of a man who had chosen for longer than he should have not to look directly at what his son was becoming, because looking directly meant acknowledging that the thing he had failed to build in Adrian, some essential interior structure, was a failure that belonged to him as much as to the boy. He had protected the illusion longer than the truth warranted. She could see that he knew it. When I became certain, he said, I had to decide how to proceed. I won't pretend the calculation wasn't complicated by the business dimensions, but I want to be honest with you. That decision took me longer than it should have. And you paid a price for my delay. How far has he gotten into our systems? She said. Far enough to create a problem that will take real effort to address. He slid a thin folder across the table. This is what my people have been tracking. It is more complete than what you have likely found on your own. She opened it, looked at the first page, closed it. I will read this thoroughly later. She looked at him. And what do you want in exchange for this information? He appreciated the question. She could see it. Not the directness, but the accuracy. The understanding that this meeting was a transaction and that transactions required named terms. I want a conversation, he said, not an agreement. Not yet. A conversation about what comes next for both our organizations. Given that my son has destabilized a relationship I consider valuable and treated as disposable. Your son is your problem, she said. His actions in our systems are a different matter. Yes, they are. He did not move. I am prepared to make you whole, Miss Vane. Whatever damages result from the breach, logistical, contractual, financial, I will address them. That is not a negotiation point. It is simply what is owed. She looked at him across the table in the warm private light of this restaurant that existed outside the visible city and tried to locate the manipulation in what he was saying, because there was always manipulation, always a structure of benefit that the words were arranged around. She could not locate it. That made her more careful, not less. You said I deserve to understand the full picture, she said. What is the rest of it? Lorenzo was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, the quality of what he said changed, became less prepared, more direct. The difference between a man speaking with arranged language and a man saying an actual thing. Adrian has been making independent agreements with 3 organizations that are currently hostile to our interests, Dominic said. He has been using the access he gained through your family's systems to make himself valuable to those organizations, offering information about Vane's logistics network as proof of capability. A pause. He intended to use the marriage as a mechanism to gain formal authority in your family's operation. A Moro son-in-law would have a plausible basis for involvement in vain business that an outside party would not have. And from that position, he planned to leverage the relationships he has been building on the side. Celeste did not speak. He was going to use your family's infrastructure to build his own power base, independent of me, against me, eventually. Dominic's voice had no particular emotion in it, but there was something underneath the neutrality, a density like stone, not cold, compressed. I have been running this organization for 22 years. I built it from nothing through discipline and patience. My son believes he is ready to lead. He is not. He is reckless and willing to destroy whatever stands between him and what he wants, including people he was supposed to protect. She sat with that for a moment. Why are you telling me all of this? He looked at her steadily. Because you asked me what the full picture was, and because I believe you have a right to know what was done to you, and why. He paused. And because I think you are considerably more capable than my son ever bothered to discover. And I find that I am interested in what a capable person in your position will do. She was not used to men in this world saying things like that, not used to being looked at the way Dominic Morrow was looking at her, with attention that had nothing to do with what she looked like and everything to do with what she was. She did not let it show. I need time to read what you have given me and speak with my father, she said, of course. And if what is in this folder is accurate, I will want a second meeting to discuss remedies. I will make myself available at whatever time works for you. She stood. He stood. They were, she noticed, nearly the same height. She in her heels, he without. He extended his hand, and she shook it. The grip of two people who understood that handshakes in their world carried weight. She felt the texture of his palm, old scars on the knuckles, the accumulated record of a particular kind of life lived at close quarters with consequence. Miss Vane. He held the handshake one beat past the standard duration, not aggressively, deliberately. I want to say one more thing. She waited. My son lost something of significant value today, he said. I want you to know that the loss is entirely his own making. What you are worth has nothing to do with what he was too blind to see. She looked at him. She found she had nothing to say to that, and she had learned that silence deployed correctly carried more weight than words. She picked up the folder and walked out. Raymond Vane's offices were lit when she arrived at 8 in the evening. Jacket off, sleeves rolled up, the particular focused stillness of a man who had been thinking hard for several hours and had arrived somewhere troubling. He looked at the folder before she spoke. Where did that come from? He said. Dominic Morrow. Raymond's face did something complicated. He was a large man, her father, with the same architectural solidity she had inherited, a face that had been formidable at 40 and had become something heavier and more serious at 63. He looked at the folder the way you looked at something you very much did not want to be what it obviously was. He called you directly. He did. She set the folder on his desk and sat. I need you to look at the first 2 pages. Tell me how bad it is from your end. He looked. The silence in the room became a different kind of silence. He said Jesus for the second time that day, which she had now heard more in one afternoon than in the previous decade combined. How long to close the vulnerabilities? Weeks, months for some of it. He set the papers down and looked at his daughter with the full weight of parental attention that never quite became professional attention, no matter how hard he tried. She held it steadily. Serafina, are you? I am fine. That is not what we need to talk about right now. He studied her for a long moment, and then he nodded, and the personal receded, and what was left was the man who had run a complicated operation for 30 years and knew how to hold the things that could not be addressed yet in a place where they would not get in the way of the things that had to be. What do you want to do? He said. I think we need to meet with Dominic Morrow, both of us. She folded her hands in her lap. What is coming from Adrian and from the organizations he has been building toward is going to be more than a canceled wedding. This is about to become very complicated. He was quiet for a long time. Then, do you trust him? Lorenzo, she thought about the restaurant, the folder, the handshake, the thing he had said as she was leaving, the hairline fracture she had seen in the compression of him when she asked why he had not stopped his son sooner. A man who had looked at himself honestly and did not like what he found. I do not trust anyone, she said, but I think he is telling the truth. Raymond nodded slowly. He picked up his phone. I will call him tonight. It was while Raymond was on that call, his voice low and measured across the desk, that Celeste opened the folder again to the third page and found the detail that changed everything about what she already knew. A timeline. Dominic's people had been tracking Adrian's external contacts alongside his access to vein systems. The first documented contact with an outside organization predated the engagement announcement by 8 months. It predated the proposal by 6. She looked at the photograph she had found on her old phone. The east loading dock of Facility 7, shot from the angle of someone measuring sight lines. Taken the previous April during the due diligence site visits that had seemed like routine preparation for a legitimate business partnership. He had not begun this because of the engagement. The engagement had been designed to enable what he had already decided to do. She was not the woman he had miscalculated about. She was the variable he had chosen precisely because he believed he had calculated her correctly. She was still looking at the page when the lights went out. All of them at once. Raymond's voice stopped mid-sentence. The city outside the windows continued its indifferent blaze, but the office was dark, and the desk phone was dead, and somewhere in the building the backup generator was taking the 11 seconds it always took to engage. 11 seconds was nothing in most contexts. In this context, it was enough time for the entire temperature of the room to change. When the emergency lighting came up, amber and low Celeste was already reaching for her phone. Raymond was already at the window, and on the screen of her phone, a message was arriving from the head of facility security with 3 words that made the folder in her hands feel suddenly very different. All 3 flagged. The message on her phone said all 3 flagged, and Celeste was already moving before Raymond finished reading it over her shoulder. The backup generator had brought the lights up amber and low, and in that light her father's face looked older than it had an hour ago, which was what real information did to a person when it arrived all at once. Dominic Morrow was on his feet before Raymond said a word. He had heard the tone of the security message from across the room. Some men developed that kind of peripheral attention after enough years of operating in environments where the difference between hearing something early and hearing it late was the difference between managing a situation and surviving one. Dominic said, "It is Adrian." It was not a question. Raymond said, "We may have a problem." Celeste said, "Facility 7 is the priority." She already had the routing map in her head the way she had everything operational in her head. Not memorized exactly, but internalized, structural. The way you knew the layout of a building you had worked in for years. If 7 goes down, we lose 4 months of contracted pharmaceutical logistics and 3 clients who will not come back. She looked at her father. The cold route goes down. The damage is not recoverable in a quarter. Raymond looked at Dominic. Dominic looked at Celeste. Something passed between all 3 of them in that amber light. Not trust, not yet, but the recognition of people who had just understood that the next several hours would define whether there was anything left to negotiate about afterward. "Get the car," Raymond said to his security officer. They moved in 2 vehicles. Dominic rode in a black SUV with Vosek and Decker, the 2 men who had been standing outside the restaurant door the entire evening without ever being introduced. Celeste and Raymond rode in Raymond's armored car with his security officer driving, and another man in the passenger seat whose jacket sat wrong at the shoulder in the specific way that meant he was carrying. The city moved past the windows the way cities moved past emergency vehicles, not knowing and not caring. Traffic lights cycling through their colors. Pedestrians leaning into the winter wind on sidewalks that had no idea what was traveling through them. Celeste was on her phone before the car cleared the parking structure. She had Thaddeus Briggs, the facility manager, at 7 on the line within 90 seconds. Briggs had worked for Vane Shipping for 11 years and delivered information with the clipped precision of a man who understood that how well he communicated in the next few minutes mattered. 4 vehicles in the lot adjacent to the east loading dock, Briggs said. Nobody came through the front. The perimeter cameras on the east side went offline about 20 minutes ago. Cameras do not go offline by accident, Celeste said. No, they do not. Night crew is 7 people total. I have pulled them all to the main floor and locked the external loading bays. She looked at her father. He was listening to his own phone but watching her. "Do you have the internal security door between the main floor and the east bay?" she said. "Closed, but not locked," Briggs said. "Takes about 90 seconds to engage the full bolt. Engage it now. On it." She ended the call and turned to Raymond. "He has people at the east dock." He knew which entrance would be least watched, and then something else arrived in her mind fully formed. the way conclusions arrived when you had been carrying the pieces long enough without knowing it. She thought about the photograph on her old phone, the angle of the shot. She thought about the site visits the previous April, all 6 primary facilities. Adrian walking the layouts with the relaxed curiosity of a man evaluating a potential business partnership. He was not evaluating, she said. He was mapping all 6. He walked the approaches, the weak points, the camera positions. He knew exactly where to park and exactly where to cut the perimeter lights. Raymond's jaw set. He planned this before he proposed to you. She looked out the window at the city. Yes. Her father was quiet for a long moment. He looked out his own window. The line of his jaw was stone, and she knew he was absorbing not just the tactical reality, but the personal one. That a man had spent 2 years using his daughter as a mechanism, and that Raymond Vane, who had built his entire professional life on reading people in rooms with accuracy, had not seen it. She watched him carry that. "We can do this," after she said, "Right now I need you with me." 2 beats. Then he nodded. The personal receded. What was left was the man who had run a complicated operation for 30 years. They were less than 4 minutes out when her phone rang again. "Unknown number," she answered. "Miss Vane," the voice said, "I think you should know that Facility 11 is not where you expect it to be on your priority list." A pause. The Halcourt documentation, the executed originals. She went still. She thought about Facility 11, archive and document storage, not operationally critical in the obvious sense, but the originals of Vane's long-term client contracts lived there. Wet signatures, legal weight that digital backups could not replicate in certain jurisdictions, and several of the older client agreements contained clauses that if the originals were compromised or disappeared, would trigger renegotiation provisions that would unravel relationships her father had spent a decade cultivating. If those documents reached the wrong hands, it was not just Vane Shipping that suffered. It was the entire ecosystem of relationships those clients had built around the assumption of Vane's discretion. She lowered the phone and looked at Dominic's SUV visible through the windshield ahead. She said to her father, 4 and 7 are the distraction. He is going for 11. The silence lasted 2 seconds. Raymond said to his security officer, "Get Dominic on the radio." She was already ahead of him. She did not wait for the radio. She rolled down the partition and said to the driver, 11 is 8 minutes from here if you take the industrial corridor. Then she looked at her father. "You need to be at 7. You have relationships with Briggs and the crew that they need to see in person tonight." She paused. "I need 2 of Dominic's men, and I need to go to 11 right now." Raymond looked at her with the expression that was trying to hold both versions of her simultaneously. The child and the woman she had become. It was the most honest expression he had, and it cost him something every time it surfaced. She held his gaze without apology. When their car pulled alongside the SUV at a red light, Raymond's security officer lowered his window and spoke to Vasek directly. 30 seconds of terse coordination. Vasek looked at Celeste through the glass. She held his gaze. He gave a single nod and said something to Decker, and the two vehicles separated at the next intersection, the SUV peeling toward Facility 11 with Celeste in the back seat, and Raymond's car continuing towards 7. Vasek drove. Decker rode shotgun and had been quiet since they left the building, the kind of quiet that was not absence, but readiness. Celeste gave them the layout from memory. Loading entrance on the south side, the fire door on the north that could be forced from outside if you knew where the pressure point was, the server room on the second floor, the vault room on the ground floor where the physical archives lived, behind a security gate with a padlock and a secondary internal bolt that could only be engaged from inside. "He will go for the vault," Vasek said. His voice was accented Eastern European with the economy of someone who did not waste words. "Yes. Ground floor north entry, if he knows about the fire door. He walked this facility last April." Vasek's eyes in the rear view were calm. "Then he knows about the fire door." The car turned onto the access road and Facility 11 appeared ahead. Low two-story reinforced walls built in the 90s specifically for climate-controlled document storage. The main entrance was lit. No vehicles in the visitor lot. The east side of the building was dark. As they came around the north perimeter, parked without lights beside the fence, was a single black car. Decker said there. 2 words. That was both of them for the last 10 minutes. Vasek pulled to the main entrance without slowing. He parked and turned in his seat and looked at Celeste with an assessment that was professional and notably free of condescension. "You go to the front desk," he said. "Verify the manager has the vault locked. Stay on the main floor. We handle the north side." She wanted to argue. She did not argue. She had asked for these men because they were capable. Overriding capable people because of pride was how operations went wrong. "The secondary bolt on the vault," she said. "The manager will know it. Make sure they do not reach the fire door. They will not." She got out. Edith Fitch was at the front desk when Celeste pushed through the entrance. A compact woman in her early 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and the expression of someone who had already understood that this night was not going to be ordinary. She had been running Facility 11 for 9 years without a single compliance complaint, and she looked at Celeste now with the calm efficiency of someone who had already begun preparing for what was coming before it arrived. "Is the vault secured?" Celeste said. "Locked and bolted 40 minutes ago when your father's office called." Fitch stood. "I sent my 3 people to the second floor. I figured whatever was coming for the ground floor." "Good call." Celeste moved to the desk and pulled up the internal camera feed on the monitor. Fitch angled toward her. "Ground floor east corridor, empty. Vault room corridor, empty. North stairwell, a shape moving low and fast. Then a second shape behind the first." She picked up the desk radio. Vasek. Static. Then his voice tight and even. "2 at the north entry. Fire door is compromised. We are engaging." She heard it from somewhere in the structure of the building. Not an explosion. Not anything dramatic. The physical percussion of a confrontation happening at close quarters in a contained space. Bodies against walls, the brief, ugly efficiency of professionals making contact. Then quiet. Then Vasek. Secured too. North corridor is clear. She let out a breath she had been holding since the access road. Then the vault corridor camera went black. Fitch said, "That is not us." Celeste was already around the desk and moving toward the ground floor corridor because a camera going black locally meant someone was already there, which meant there was a third person who had not come through the north fire door. She pushed through the access door and stopped. Adrian Morrow was standing in the corridor outside the vault room. 10 feet away. He looked terrible. He had looked the last time she saw him like a man who had everything managed. The clothes, the posture, the performance of competence. What was standing in front of her now was what happened after the performance collapsed. His shirt was wrong. His face had the specific diminishment of someone who had not slept properly in days and was running on urgency, and the particular desperation of a man whose plan was 2 steps ahead of his actual resources. But he was between her and the vault door, and in his right hand was a bolt cutter, and the padlock on the vault's outer gate was already on the floor. They looked at each other. "Adrian," she said, "don't." He held up one hand, not aggressive, almost tired. "I do not want to do this with you." "Then leave." "I cannot leave." He looked at the vault door and then back at her, and what was on his face was something she had not expected. Not the calculation, not the performance, something rawer than that. Cornered. But underneath the cornered quality, something else. Something she recognized because she had heard the shape of it before in people who had arrived at the edge of something and found it was further than they expected. He said, "I need the Hal Court documentation, specifically the cross-referenced client files." He said it like he was explaining something, like they were still 2 people in the same conversation, having it in good faith. "If I have those originals, I have leverage. Without them, you are in the position you have put yourself in," she said, "which is one where you have attacked your father's interests and your former fiancé's family's property in the same night. And the only direction from here is worse." He flinched, just slightly. "You do not understand what he has been doing," Adrian said. "My father, what he has been building and what you are walking into. He is not helping you. He is absorbing you. That is what he does. He finds something useful, and he wraps around it until it belongs to him." "Versus what you were doing," she said, "marrying me while feeding our operational data to people who wanted to replace him." "That was supposed to be different." He stopped, started again. "I was going to." She watched him. He stopped again. His jaw worked. Whatever he had been about to say, he heard it in his own head first, and understood how it would land, and he did not say it. And in the space of that silence, she saw something she had not seen in 2 years of knowing Adrian Morrow. Not the performance, not the 3 moves ahead, just a person, tired and cornered and wanting something he had never been given the language to actually name. "There is a version of tonight," she said, "that ends with you walking out of this building without anyone pressing charges. Your father's men have 2 of yours in the north corridor. Nobody has called the police. Nothing irrevocable has happened yet. He looked at her. If you go through that vault door, that version disappears. She held his eyes. You know I am right. He was quiet for a long moment. She watched the calculation run. Not the fast, smooth calculation of the man she had known, but something slower and more desperate. The calculation of someone whose options had been narrowing for weeks and who could feel the walls. Then his phone rang. He looked at it. His face changed. She watched it happen with the specific attention she gave to things that mattered. The rawness closed. Something deliberate moved into its place. Not anger, not calculation exactly. A decision being made in real time in the space of 3 seconds. Whatever was on that screen had reorganized his understanding of how much he had left to lose. He looked up at her. The person she had almost reached was gone. I have to go, he said. He picked up the padlock from the floor. He placed it back in the loop without locking it. He looked at her for one more second with the expression of a man who has just chosen the harder version of the next few hours. Tell my father I am not done. He walked past her down the corridor. She did not stop him. She stood for a moment outside the vault door, listening to his footsteps, and then the sound of a door opening at the far end of the corridor, and then nothing. She turned and walked back to the main floor, where Edith Fitch was on the phone, voice steady, handling the aftermath of an almost event with the calm of someone who had been waiting for something to go wrong long enough that when it arrived, she had already rehearsed. Celeste touched her shoulder as she passed. Good work tonight. Is it over? Fitch said. Celeste thought about Adrian's face when he looked at his phone. The decision shutting into place behind his eyes like something locking. No, she said. I do not think it is. She called Dominic from the entrance. 7 is secure, he said when he answered. 4 is secure. What about 11? 11 is secure. She paused. Adrian was here personally. He did not take anything. A silence. Is he gone? Yes. He got a phone call and left. She thought about the way his face had changed. Someone called, and it shut something down. He was close to stepping back. Then whatever he saw on that screen changed the calculation entirely. What did it look like? Dominic said. It looked like a man who had just been told he had one option left. She paused. I need to get back to 7. I will meet you there. The debrief at Facility 7 took 2 hours. Dominic and Raymond sat at opposite ends of a folding table in the facility manager's office, while Celeste stood at a whiteboard with a marker and mapped what they knew. Adrian's movements, his external contacts, the positioning of unknown vehicles at Facility 4, the specific documents he had been trying to reach at 11. Vosek and Raymond's security officer stood against the wall and added operational details when asked. Raymond had not spoken directly to Dominic for the first 40 minutes. He had spoken at the whiteboard, at the map, at the timeline Celeste was building. Dominic had answered and added and twice corrected assumptions she had made with information she did not yet have. The channel between them was functional before it was personal, which was the only honest way to build it. Around 2 in the morning, Raymond got up to get coffee from the machine in the corner and came back with a second cup and set it in front of Dominic without comment. Dominic looked at the cup and then at Raymond and nodded once. That was it. That was how it started, the phone call, Dominic said. He had come back to it twice already. Whoever called him pulled him back from a position where he was already retreating, which means someone activated an agreement he had already made, Celeste said. She put the marker down. With the Castellano interests or with someone above them? She looked at the board. Adrian has been building for months. He does not have one arrangement. He has several, and the ones we know about are probably not the most important ones. Raymond looked at Dominic. Who is above the Castellano organization in the current structure? Dominic's voice had the quality it always had, measured, informational, and underneath the surface something compressed and attentive. The question is not who is above them. The question is who Adrian believes can deliver what he needs now that tonight failed. She looked at the whiteboard, at the section she had labeled External Contacts, ? After 2 of the 3 entries. He needed the Halcourt documents to deliver as proof of access, she said. He did not get them tonight, which means whatever agreement he predicated on having them is now in question. So he goes back to whoever he made that agreement with and explains that the delivery failed, or he offers them something else. Dominic looked at the whiteboard. Then he looked at the section she had not yet labeled. His Eastern captains. Harlan Cross is the most exposed, he said. Cross has a genuine grievance about how I handled the distribution reallocation 4 years ago. I managed it badly. I addressed it through intermediaries instead of directly, and that left room for someone else to address it more personally. She looked at him. Has he been approached? I do not know yet. But if I were Adrian and I needed to demonstrate value to an external party, I would have started with Cross 6 months ago. She wrote the name on the board. Then her phone lit up on the table. Unknown number. She looked at it. Same format as Dominic's call 3 days ago. She answered. Miss Vane, the voice said. Male. Flat. Accented in a way she could not immediately place. My name is not important. What is important is that Adrian Morrow paid us to deliver a message to you tonight. And we have decided after the events of this evening that we would rather deliver a different one. She said nothing. Let the man continue. He has made agreements with 4 organizations, not 2, 4, and one of them is something your future partner does not know about yet. The room had gone very still. Dominic and Raymond were both watching her. What organization, she said. The voice said a name. Celeste watched Dominic Morrow's face. This man who had remained controlled and compressed through everything, through the facility crisis and the debrief and 2 hours of difficult information delivered without warning. His face did something it had not done all night. It went pale. Not the theatrical pallor of surprise, the genuine pallor of a man who has just heard the name of the thing he built everything else to never have to hear again. She kept her voice flat. Say that again. The voice said it again. Felix Strand. Dominic had stood up, both hands pressed flat on the table, looking at nothing. The pallor was still in his face, and she had known him for 4 days, and in those 4 days she had watched him absorb significant information without visible reaction. This was not that. This was a man who had just heard something that reorganized his understanding of a situation he believed he controlled. "Who gave you this information?" She said into the phone. "Adrian." He told us the name as a guarantee of his credibility. He told us Strand had agreed to back his play at the upcoming gala in exchange for access to the Morrow organization's southern roots after Dominic was removed. A pause. We decided that backing Adrian Morrow into a situation involving Felix Strand was not something we wanted to be adjacent to. You understand? I understand. Why tell me? Because you are going to be the one who matters when this resolves. People in our position prefer to have goodwill with whoever is still standing. One more thing. Adrian's timeline has moved up. He is not waiting for the gala. He made a call 2 hours ago that suggested he is moving in 3 days, not 6. The line disconnected. She lowered the phone. The room was waiting. Raymond was reading her face the way he read rooms, looking for the shape of what she had heard in her expression before she had to speak it. "Felix Strand," she said. Dominic sat back down. The motion was controlled, but the control was visible in a way it had not been before. He picked up his coffee cold for an hour and held it without drinking. Raymond said, "Who is Felix Strand?" Dominic was quiet for a moment, not deciding whether to answer, deciding where to begin. "Marco Strand," he said, using the man's full name with the weight of someone who had spent years being careful about when to say it out loud, "is the reason I built what I built the way I built it. 25 years ago, I was operating at a much smaller scale. Strand ran the Southern Midwest distribution network. He was the dominant structure in this region. I was adjacent to him, useful to him, for 7 years. Raymond said nothing. Celeste said nothing. When I became strong enough to operate independently, I did. Dominic said, I moved my structure out from under his and established my own roots, my own relationships. He considered it a betrayal. I considered it survival. We have had a stable non-aggression for 18 years. He operates south and east. I operate here. We do not interfere with each other. He paused, and Adrian found him. Celeste stood at the whiteboard. She picked up the marker and added, Strand, at the left edge of the timeline, drew a line to Adrian, extended it forward to the gala. She stepped back and looked at it. He is not going to show up at the gala as a challenger, she said. He is going to arrive as a neutral party, the stabilizing force. He will let Adrian's failure speak for itself and position himself as the alternative to chaos. And if he has already been working Harlan Cross, she turned from the board. If Cross is already his, then Strand does not come to the gala with an argument. He comes with evidence. He comes with a captain already standing behind him, and the assembled families will have to look at that and decide what it means. Dominic looked at her. His expression was the compressed and attentive one, but the compression had a different quality now. The quality of someone who has just confirmed something they did not want confirmed. She said we need to get to Cross before Strand does. If Cross has not fully committed, then Dominic needs to talk to him directly, not through intermediaries. The grievance is real. Address the grievance directly, and it becomes a different conversation. Dominic looked at the table for a moment. Then, I will call him tonight. She nodded. She moved toward the door. There was one more call she needed to make, and she needed to make it outside, where the cold air would keep her head sharp and where no one would see her face while she navigated what came next. The air outside Facility 7 was bitter in the way Chicago in February was bitter with a quality that went past cold and became something more insistent. She stood 10 feet from the entrance and pulled out her phone and called a number she had been keeping for 2 years without using, a contact she had cultivated during the due diligence period of the engagement when she had been quietly building her own understanding of the Morrow organization. In the careful way she built understanding of everything. The contact's name in her phone was listed simply as Reese. Callum Reese answered on the 4th ring, which meant he was awake and screening. Miss Vane. Alert. Careful. Tell me what you know about Adrian and Felix Strand. Silence for 5 seconds. Then I know more than I should. Tell me anyway. She heard him move, a door closing, the acoustic change of a person removing themselves from proximity to others. Adrian reached out to Strand's people 8 months ago, before the engagement was announced. He said it with the weight of someone who understood that timing mattered. The engagement was always supposed to be temporary, long enough to establish his position in Vane operations. Then use that position as the thing he brought Strand a proof of access to justify Strand's support of his challenge to Dominic. She stood in the cold and absorbed this. You knew about this 8 months ago, she said. I suspected. I confirmed it 3 months ago. She said nothing. I want you to understand that I considered telling someone, he said. The people you tell something like that to the consequences of the information going to the wrong party. He stopped. It is not cowardice. It is arithmetic. She thought about Adrian in the corridor, the bolt cutter, the phone call. She thought about 3 months of Callum Reese sitting on information that could have changed the shape of the last 8 months. Where is Adrian right now, she said. Not at any location connected to the Morrow organization. I know that much. I know Strand has people in the city. They arrived yesterday. 4 of them. River North somewhere. That is what I have. She looked at the sky above Facility 7. The light pollution of Chicago made it the color of dirty copper. Callum, she said, if you help me in the next 3 days, your arithmetic improves significantly. If you do not, and this resolves the way I intend it to resolve, I will remember that you sat on this for 3 months. A silence. What do you need? He said. Location updates on Adrian when you have them. Anything you hear about Strand's people moving? She paused. And the Morrow Eastern captains, Harlan Cross specifically. Do you know if he has been approached? A longer silence. Yes, he said. How far along? Far enough that it will not be a short conversation to undo. She went back inside. Raymond was on his phone. Dominic was looking at the timeline on the whiteboard with the expression of a man who had spent 22 years building something and was now looking at the architecture of the threat that had been assembling itself inside that structure without his knowledge. Not defeat in his face, something more complicated. The compression of a man who understood that the next 3 days would determine whether what he had built survived the person he had failed to build correctly. She picked up the marker. She added cross to the board with an arrow she did not like drawing. She added the number 3 above the timeline. 3 days, she said. He is not moving at the gala. He is moving before it. She looked at the line she had drawn. He wants to walk into that room with it already done. He wants to arrive at the gala with Dominic's organization already fractured with Strand, already positioned as the stabilizing force, and present every family in that room with a situation they have to respond to rather than a proposal they can decline. Dominic looked at the board, then at her. He said, "What are you thinking?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I am thinking we do not wait for the gala to make the declaration. I am thinking we make it public before the gala tonight, in a way that forces Strand to respond to our frame instead of arriving with his own." Raymond looked up from his phone. "What kind of declaration?" Dominic said. She looked at both of them, at her father first, then at Dominic. The kind that puts every family in this city on notice about what the new structure looks like. She paused. Before Strand has the chance to present an alternative version, the room was quiet. Outside, Facility 7's loading bays hummed with the machinery of cold storage doing its work. The city beyond the perimeter moved with its permanent indifference. And inside this office, around a folding table with cold coffee and a whiteboard full of lines that mapped the shape of something very complicated, 3 people sat with the weight of a decision that could not be walked back once it was made. Raymond said Celeste. He said it the way he said it when he wanted her full attention. She gave it to him. "You understand what you are proposing, what it means for what comes after." "I know what comes after," she said. She held his eyes. "This is the right move, not because it is safe, because it is accurate." She looked at Dominic. "What happened in the last 4 days is real. What we built under pressure is real. The question is whether we acknowledge what is real in the place where it will matter most." Dominic looked at her for a long 3 seconds. Then he reached into his coat pocket and took out his phone and made a call. She listened to him speak, not to her, to the person on the other end who handled communications for his organization, the person who could move a message through the right channels before midnight. His voice was low and precise, and when he ended the call and set the phone on the table, the room felt different, smaller, more specific. "By midnight," he said, "everyone who matters will know." She nodded. She looked at the whiteboard one more time. At the name, Felix Strand, on the left edge of the timeline, and the line she had drawn forward from it, and the gala at the end of that line, and the 3 days between now and then. Then she capped the marker and set it down on the table and picked up her phone, because there was still work to do before morning, and 3 days was not very long at all. She slept 4 hours in a hotel near the West Loop. not because she had resolved anything, but because she had learned long ago that exhaustion was a form of error, and the next 3 days did not have room for errors. When she woke at 6 in the morning, the city outside the window was still dark, and her phone had 11 messages, and a clarity that felt carved rather than rested into her. The particular clear-headedness that came not from peace, but from the removal of uncertainty. She knew the shape of the problem now. The remaining question was execution. She met Dominic at his office in the Loop at 7, not the real estate company's public suite, but a room 2 floors below it, accessible by a separate elevator, furnished with the same compression and deliberateness she had come to associate with him. Nothing unnecessary, nothing performative, everything chosen for function and held to that standard without apology. He was already there when she arrived, coffee made, and the information she had extracted from Callum Reese already integrated into his own picture in a way that told her he had also spent the night making calls rather than sleeping. Harlan Cross, he said when she sat down, and a name she had not given him. You got there before I did, she said. I had a different source. He looked at her with the slight recalibration she had come to recognize as his version of surprise. I want to know your source. After she said, right now, I need to know whether Cross can be pulled back or whether he has already committed. Dominic thought about it, really thought. She watched the genuine consideration move through his expression without the reflexive performance of certainty that most men in his position defaulted to. Cross is a man who runs every decision through the question of what it costs him personally, he said. Not out of cowardice, out of a very precise accounting of where he stands at any given moment. If the calculation changes, he changes. But the grievance is real. I mishandled the Hargrove reallocation 4 years ago, and I addressed it through people instead of directly, and that left a wound I did not treat. Strand's people found that wound and worked it. She looked at him. Then you need to talk to Cross before the gala, directly, not through anyone else. He nodded once. Tonight. She opened the folder she had brought from the hotel and laid 3 pages on his desk. What Callum Reese had confirmed about the timeline of Adrian's external contacts cross-referenced against the facility access logs from the previous 7 months. Dominic read it without speaking. When he finished, he turned the pages face down and was quiet for a moment. He reached into his desk and slid his phone across to her. Screen up. A message from a number logged only as S, with a location in River North, and a time. Noon today. Strand wants a meeting, he said. This came in at 5 this morning. She looked at the message, then at him. He is confident. He has been waiting 18 years. He thinks Adrian has already done the work and that I am coming to him in a position of weakness. Are you going? I was considering it. She looked at him steadily. If you go, you accept the frame. You walk into that room as the party receiving terms. She leaned forward slightly. Do not go. Send me. The silence that followed was long enough to have texture. Dominic set the phone down and looked at her with an assessment that was thorough and entirely without the reflexive skepticism she would have received from most men in his position. He was thinking, not reacting. She had come to value that distinction more than almost anything else about how he operated. "Strand does not know me," she said. "He knows Vane Shipping. He knows the ports and the warehouses and the contracts. But he has never been in a room with me, and he has been calculating around a version of this situation in which I am a peripheral variable. If I walk into that meeting, he has to recalibrate in real time, and he cannot do what he planned to do, because what he planned to do was meet the man he has been building toward for 18 years. She held his eyes. "I take that away from him. And while he is recalibrating, I learn what he actually has. He will know immediately that I sent you instead of coming myself." "Yes," which tells him that you are already operating as a unified structure, which means Adrian's narrative, the one where I am a vulnerability and an outside element that weakened your position, falls apart before Strand has said a single word of his prepared argument. Dominic picked up his coffee. He was quiet for 30 seconds. The real 30 seconds of a man running an honest calculation and following it where it led, regardless of whether he liked the destination. There are things about how Strand operates in a room that I need to tell you before you go anywhere near him, he said. "Tell me." It took 20 minutes. She listened without interrupting, building the picture from the inside out. Not the public version of Felix Strand, the established operator with his stable territories and his 18-year truce, but the man behind the stability, the things Dominic had learned in 7 years of adjacency, the specific patterns, the way Strand used the first 5 minutes of any meeting to establish a frame that everything afterward would be interpreted through, the things he respected and the things he destroyed, and the particular cruelty he reserved for people who walked into his rooms without understanding what kind of room it was. "He is going to say something about your appearance," Dominic said when he finished. His jaw was tight. "It is fine," she said. "I am accustomed to it, and I know how to use it." She looked at him steadily. "What I need to know is whether you trust me to handle what is in that room." He looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said. It came out without hesitation, which was the only version of it that mattered. The meeting was at noon in a private room above a restaurant in River North. Strand's choice, his territory, which was either confidence or a miscalculation, depending on how you read it. Celeste arrived 2 minutes late. Not 3, not 5. Not the kind of late that announced itself, just enough to establish that she was not anxious about arrival times. Felix Strand was 61 years old and looked like what happened when a man spent 6 decades taking exactly what he wanted from every room he entered. He was not physically large. His power had never been physical. It was something more ambient, a quality of occupation. Like he had decided he owned whatever space he was in, and the space had accepted the decision without being asked. He had sharp features, white hair cut short, and eyes that ran a visible assessment of her the moment she walked through the door. Not subtle, meant to be seen. He looked at her body first, then her face, then her hands. The specific inventory of a man who had done this so many times, it had become automatic a way of establishing, before anything was said, who he believed was in the room. "You are not Dominic Morrow," he said. "No." She sat down across from him. His two men stood against the wall. She had come alone, which had also been deliberate. "He sends his regards. He had a prior commitment." Strand's eyes did not move from her face. "He is sending his woman to a meeting with me. He is sending his partner," she said, "which is a different thing." Something moved through his expression, the recalibration she had anticipated. He had prepared for a different meeting. She watched him hold his prepared frame in place and feel it not quite fit the shape of what had walked in. He was not. She assessed a man who adapted quickly. He was a man who imposed his frame on situations, and when the frame did not fit, he held it in place anyway, out of the habit of having it fit for so long. "Adrian told me Dominic was weakened," Strand said, "that the situation with the Vane family had destabilized his position. Adrian was wrong about a number of things. Adrian told me the Vane shipping network was accessible through the engagement arrangement. Adrian had a version of events that served his interests." She kept her hands loose on the table, her voice conversational. Most of what he told people was constructed that way. Strand looked at her for a long moment. Then he leaned back in his chair. There was something almost appreciative in it. The way a man who had spent decades in rooms like this recognized when someone across the table was not performing. "Go ahead," he said. "The facilities Adrian targeted are secured," she said. "The breach was minimal. The Vane and Morrow alignment is intact and moving forward. The Eastern captains Adrian claimed were turned. Harlan Cross is having a direct conversation with Dominic tonight, and that situation will be resolved before morning." She watched his face as she delivered each point. The recalibration, the adjustment, the particular cold anger of a man who had invested in a return that was not arriving. The people Adrian paid to position at Facility 4 have been speaking with Dominic's people since yesterday. The timeline Adrian gave you was wrong. He moved early because he was panicking, not because he was executing a plan. The room was quiet. "You have invested significant resources in a man who told you what you wanted to hear," she said. "The return on that investment at this point is not what he promised you." Strand's face had gone through several adjustments during her delivery. She noted each one. The recalibration, the cold structural anger, and then something else, the particular expression of a man who has understood that he has been used, not by his enemy, by the person he thought was his instrument. "I have been waiting a long time," he said. "I know. 18 years, he looked at her. Something in the directness of it shifted the temperature of the room by a degree. "You think you understand what that means? I think I understand what it cost you to wait and what it would cost you to move incorrectly now." She held his gaze. What Dominic built, he built through discipline and patience over 22 years. If you had come at it directly, you would have faced that structure head on. Adrian offered you a mechanism to come at it from the inside. That was the value he was providing. She paused, but the mechanism was built on a foundation he did not actually control, and now the mechanism has failed, and what you are left with is your original position, plus whatever you have spent in the last 8 months, plus the knowledge that the people you are up against have just spent 4 days proving to each other and to every organization watching that they work. Strand was very still. "What's the offer?" he said. "No offer today," she said. "Today is information exchange." She folded her hands on the table. "Today, I want to understand what Adrian actually promised you specifically, so I can tell you which parts of it were real and which parts he invented." He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at the table. Something in the set of his shoulders changed. Not defeat, not softening. The specific adjustment of a very experienced man, deciding that the person across from him had earned a certain level of candor, if only because that level of candor served his own interests better than the alternative. He talked for 22 minutes. She listened with the complete focused attention she had trained over 30 years, the kind of listening that was also cataloging and cross-referencing and building the picture from every fragment as it arrived. Some of what he said confirmed what she already knew. Some of it was new. And then he said something that stopped her cold. She kept her face still, but something must have moved in her eyes, because Strand paused mid-sentence and said, "You did not know that part." She did not answer. She was still processing. He said it again. "Adrian promised me documentation from Vane Shipping's private client files, identification records, routing authorizations, a cross-reference document linking 3 of your most sensitive long-term clients to the specific facilities they use and the specific schedules they operate on. He told me he would deliver them after the gala as proof of his access and his good faith." She looked at Strand. "From the look on your face, he either does not have them or he should not have them." She thought about Facility 11, the vault room, Adrian in the corridor with the bolt cutter, the vault door he had not opened. But she thought also about the site visits the previous April, Adrian walking the layout with the relaxed curiosity of a potential business partner, and about the camera in the vault corridor going dark before she reached it, meaning someone had already been in that corridor, and about the padlock Adrian had picked up from the floor and placed back without locking, the gesture of a man who had failed to accomplish what he came for, except that she was not sure anymore that he had failed. She was not sure at all. "Excuse me," she said. She stood up. She walked out of the private room, down the stairs, through the restaurant, and out onto the sidewalk. She called Edith Fitch. "The vault at 11, she said when Fitch answered. "I need you to do a complete inventory right now. Every file in the Meridian Group and Halcourt sections. Every document. Today, Miss Vane. I have 3 people. And I need it in the next 2 hours, please." She stood on the sidewalk in River North and waited. Above her, the city moved with its ordinary indifference. Cabs and wind, and the distant percussion of construction on a building she could not see. She stood in the middle of it and felt the cold working through her coat, and understood that she had just realized something she should have realized 3 days ago in the corridor, when Adrian had placed the padlock back on the vault's outer gate and walked away, looking like a man who had failed. He had walked away looking like a man who had failed. But Adrian Morrow did not fail cleanly. She knew that now, with the certainty of someone who had spent 6 days learning his pattern, he did not retreat without taking something with him. Her phone rang 14 minutes later. Fitch. Miss Vane. Fitch's voice had the tight, controlled quality of someone delivering information they did not want to deliver. The Meridian files are present and complete. The Halcourt section. A pause. The Halcourt section has been accessed recently. The folders are here, but 3 of the internal documents are missing. Which documents? Fitch described them: client identification records, routing authorizations, and one cross-reference document linking 3 of Vane Shipping's most sensitive long-term clients to specific facilities and operating schedules. She closed her eyes for 2 seconds. He had not taken them the night of the facility crisis. Edith Fitch had locked the vault 40 minutes before they arrived. The vault door had not been opened, but the site visits in April had given him legitimate access to the building, legitimate access to the ground floor, and the time between when the vault camera went dark and when she entered the corridor had been long enough for someone who knew the layout and had prepared. He had not come to Facility 11 3 nights ago to take those documents. He had come to take more. The most important ones, the ones Strand was describing, he had already had for 8 months. She went back inside. Strand looked at her when she sat down. Read her face. Said nothing. Adrian has documents from our vault, she said. Her voice was level. Client identification records, sensitive ones. And he told you he would deliver them after the gala. Yes. She looked at him steadily. If he delivers them, if those documents reach anyone outside a very small circle, it is not just Vane Shipping that suffers. 3 of the clients named in that cross-reference document have relationships with organizations in this room. She paused. Your distribution network uses 2 of them. Strand went very still. Adrian has a weapon, she said, and he is pointing it at everyone equally, including you. He told you he was giving you leverage. What he actually did was put something on the table that is aimed in every direction and told you it was only pointed at his father. A silence stretched across the table, long enough to change the quality of the air between them. Where is he? Strand said. And the way he said it was not a question about geography. It was the voice of a man who had just understood that the person he had been working with had lied to him in a way that had personal consequences he had not agreed to accept. I am going to find out, she said. She stood. We are not done with this conversation, but right now I need to make some calls. She walked out with the missing documents and Strand's silence at her back and the full weight of what Adrian had done settling into her with architectural completeness. She made 4 calls in 11 minutes on the sidewalk. When she got back in the car, she had a location. Callum Reese had come through. Adrian was at a property in Pilsen, a converted warehouse purchased 18 months ago through 3 layers of shell company, prepared before the engagement was announced, before the proposal, before any of it. She called Dominic. "Pilsen," she said, and gave him the address. "He is there now." Two vehicles outside, lights on the second floor. Dominic was quiet for 1 second. "I can have people there in 20 minutes. "I am 12 minutes away." She paused. "The documents are already in that building. If your people go in without someone who can identify and secure those specific files in the middle of whatever happens, we could lose them. Adrian could destroy them or transmit them before anyone reaches him." She paused. "I need to be there." The silence on the line had a specific weight. She had learned in 6 days to read the texture of Dominic's silences. This one was not reluctance. Not exactly. It was the silence of a man running an honest calculation that was arriving somewhere he did not like but could not argue with. "I will be 3 minutes behind you," he said. "Do not be longer than that," she told the driver. The warehouse sat at the end of a block of similar structures in the part of Pilsen that was half art studios and half the quiet machinery of things that did not want to be noticed. Clean exterior walls, no signage, a loading bay door that looked sealed, and a smaller personnel entrance on the south side. 2 black vehicles in the adjacent lot, lights on the second floor north side. Callum Reese's contact, a young man she had never met, handed her a burner phone and a single index card with a floor sketch drawn in ballpoint. Second floor, main open space, 2 walled rooms on the north end, stairwell on the east side. 2 marks on the sketch, one labeled him and one labeled the number 3. She went in. The ground floor was bare concrete and orange streetlight through high windows. The stairs were where the sketch said they were. She went up. The second floor was warmer. Someone had portable heaters running, folding tables with laptops, a cot against one wall, paper maps and printed documents pinned to a board. The visual grammar of someone who had been running an operation from this location for longer than one night. Adrian was at one of the tables with his back to her. He was alone in the main space. The 2 walled rooms had their doors closed, and from behind one she could hear low conversation and the sound of someone on a phone. She crossed the space in 9 steps. She picked up the folder closest to her right hand as she passed the edge of the table. Manila. Vane shipping logo on the tab. Adrian heard her. He turned. 3 seconds. 2 people assessing a situation neither fully expected. His face ran through surprise and calculation, and then something that was almost relief, which told her more than anything else could have. He was exhausted in a way that had started eating through the performance. Some part of him was tired of running. Then he saw the folder in her hand. "Don't," he said. "I already have it." He stood up. Both hands came up slightly, not threatening, the reflex of someone trying to slow a situation down. He looked like he had not slept in a week. Dark circles that had moved past cosmetic and become structural. "You do not understand what I am trying to stop," he said. She held up the folder. "Stop explaining what you are trying to do. I know what you are trying to do. I have known for 4 days." She kept her voice even. "Where are the other 2 documents, the cross-reference and the routing authorization?" He looked at her. "Adrian." She said it directly, and looked at him directly. "You are at the end of this tonight. The only question remaining is what the end looks like for you. Where are the other documents? They are the only leverage I have left." "They are not leverage. They are a liability." She stepped closer. "You told Strand you would deliver them. Strand now understands that what you are holding is pointed at him as much as anyone. He is not on your side anymore." She said his name once more, quieter. "You are out of allies completely." His jaw worked. She watched him absorb it. The confirmation. The final closing of the walls she had been building around his operation for 4 days. He reached across the table and picked up a second folder and held it out. She took it, opened it, ran through the contents. The cross-reference was there. 3 pages. The routing authorization, 2 pages. She checked them against Fitch's description, complete. "Is that everything?" "That is everything from 11. He sat back against the edge of the table, the posture of someone setting down something very heavy. "I had digital copies made." He nodded at the laptop. "The only copies. I did not send them anywhere. I was waiting until I had more." He stopped, looked at his hands. "I was waiting until I had more than I actually had." She looked at the laptop, then at him. "Walk me through the deletion. Completely. In front of me." He did it. She watched every step. When it was done, she closed the laptop and stood with it under her arm and looked at him across the table in the orange-lit space of the converted warehouse. The portable heaters running, the maps on the board, the paper architecture of a plan that had dissolved from the inside. "It was never going to work," she said, not cruelly, as a fact. "I know that now. You knew it earlier than now." He did not argue. He rubbed a hand across his face. The Strand piece was supposed to be what made it work. If Strand showed at the gala behind me. He dropped his hand. "I needed something external to make up for what I did not have internally." "What you did not have internally." He looked at her. "Credibility within my father's organization." He said it like pulling out something that had been embedded a long time. The particular, deliberate discomfort of addressing what had been avoided. "They do not respect me. They never have. I am Dominic Morrow's son, and that is all I have ever been to any of them. I thought if I built something of my own, if I arrived with my own structure behind me." He stopped. "Not just a name," she said. "Yes." He looked at her. His face was what it had been in the Facility 11 corridor. The person underneath, tired and cornered, and wanting something he had never been given the right language to ask for. She understood that specifically. She understood more than she intended to show. She thought about this and did not soften, but she understood it. "Your father's people are going to be here in 2 minutes," she said. "The 2 people in that room are going to have a difficult night regardless. What happens to you depends on what you do in the next 60 seconds." He looked toward the north rooms, then at her. "I need you to get out of the way of what comes next completely," she said. "The gala, the challenge, the Strand arrangement. You walk away from all of it publicly, and whatever your father decides about the organizational piece, you do not fight it. He will disinherit me. Yes, everything I was supposed to. Not yours, she said, not in the way you thought it was. She held his eyes. But you can still have a life, Adrian. That is not nothing. A lot of people who make the choices you made in the last 8 months do not get to have a life. From outside came the sound of vehicles, more than one. Adrian looked toward the sound and then back at her, and what she saw in his face in that moment was the thing she had glimpsed in the corridor at Facility 11, the person underneath all of it, not the performance, not the calculation, just a tired and frightened person who had spent his whole life trying to become something and had never once been given the actual tools to build it. She felt the weight of that briefly. She let herself feel it. Then she put it down. "Stand up," she said. "Walk to the stairwell. Go down and go outside and go directly to your father when you see him." She paused. "Do not make him come up here looking for you." Adrian stood. He looked at the board with its maps and papers for a moment. He reached out and pulled one sheet from the board and held it. Then he let it fall. He walked to the stairwell. The north room door opened at the same moment. One of the two men, startled by the sound of the vehicles outside, came out to check. He was young, mid-20s, with the unseasoned look of someone in over his depth. He saw Celeste and stopped. "Sit down," she said. "Put your phone on the table." He sat. He put the phone on the table. Footsteps on the stairs, heavier than Adrian's, more than one person. Vasek came through the stairwell door first and read the room in one sweep and nodded at her. Decker was behind him. Then Dominic. Dominic's eyes went to the empty table, then to her, then to the folders and the laptop in her arms. "He went down voluntarily," she said. "The documents are all here. Digital copies are deleted. I watched him do it." She held out the folders. He took them. "The laptop needs someone to verify the deletion was complete." "I have someone." He looked at the young man at the table, at the closed north door. He gave Vasek a look, and Vasek moved. Celeste turned away from what followed and looked out the window at the street below, where Adrian was standing beside one of the vehicles, hands at his sides, talking to one of the security detail. Not running. That meant something. She was not sure yet exactly what, but it meant something. Dominic came to stand beside her at the window. They looked down at his son together. "He walked out on his own," she said. "I know. Petrov told me." Dominic's voice was quiet, not soft. Quiet in the way that things that had been under pressure for a long time went quiet when the pressure finally released. "When I was 30 years old, he said, I made the decision to leave Strand's operation. My father thought I was destroying myself. He thought I was throwing away the only security I had for the sake of my own ambition. He watched his son below. He was partly right. The ambition was real, but so was the other piece, the need to build something that was mine." He paused. "I understood what Adrian wanted. I just never made that clear to him. I let him believe that wanting something was the same as being ready for it. That is on me." She looked at him. "You can tell me the rest of that," after she said, "after the gala." He straightened. The personal receded. The operational returned. She watched the transition, the way she had been watching all of his transitions all week. The compression of the man, the way he gathered everything interior and brought forward the version of himself that handled what needed to be handled. Strand, he said. He is recalculating. I told him about the documents, that they were pointed at him equally. He is not going to back Adrian's play at the gala, but that does not mean he is standing down. He will come in and present himself as the neutral party, the stabilizing force. Which could work, Dominic said, if Cross is still in question. I got a message from my father while I was in the warehouse. She took out her phone and showed him. Raymond's text. 3 words. Cross took the meeting. Dominic read it. His expression did not change, but the set of his jaw did, in the specific way she had come to associate with him receiving information that required immediate adjustment. One captain aligned with Strand before the gala, she said. Strand is not coming in as neutral. He is coming in with a piece of the organization already in his hand. She looked at him. We cannot defend. If we go into that room defending, we lose. We need to go in taking ground. He looked at her. What are you thinking? I am thinking we do not walk into the gala and respond to Strand's frame. I am thinking the declaration we made at midnight changes what that room looks like when we walk into it, but only if we use it correctly. She looked down at the street where Adrian was still standing, not running, waiting. She looked back at Dominic. Every family in that room tomorrow night is going to be watching to see what we are. Not what we say we are, what we actually are when Strand makes his move. Then we show them, Dominic said. Yes. She turned from the window. But first, you need to talk to Cross. Tonight. Directly. The grievance is real, and it needs to be addressed like it is real, not managed like it is inconvenient. He nodded. I will call him when we leave here. They went downstairs together, out through the personnel entrance into the cold air. Adrian was still by the vehicle. He turned when he heard the door. He looked at his father. Dominic stopped 4 feet from him. They were silent for a moment. 2 men who shared enough features that the relationship was legible in both their faces. The silence between them had density, the specific weight of things that had not been said for too many years. I am not going to the gala, Adrian said. His voice was flat, decided. No, Dominic said. The Strand arrangement. It is done. I am done with it. Adrian looked at his father, and in the look was the thing she had seen twice now. The person underneath, tired and wanting something he had never had the language to ask for directly. I know what it costs, Adrian said. Dominic looked at his son for a long time. We will talk, he said. After Adrian repeated. It was not forgiveness. It was not resolution. It was a door left open by the width of one hand by 2 people who did not have the capacity in this moment to open it further. She understood it. She looked away and gave them the privacy of not being observed. She looked at the street instead, at the city, at the gala that was now less than 24 hours away, at Strand somewhere in the city, with one of Dominic's captains already in his pocket, and 18 years of patience behind him, and a room full of assembled families in front of him. Her phone buzzed. Her father. She answered. I heard, Raymond said. His voice had the quality it always had when he had processed something significant and arrived somewhere calm. Are you all right? Yes. She stood in the cold outside the Pilsen warehouse with the laptop and the recovered folders and the full picture of what the next day required. I need to talk to you about tomorrow. The gala. Yes, she paused. Come to the gala. Be there. Not as backup. Just be there. He was quiet for a moment. And after she said, I want to sit down with you and talk about the future of Vane Shipping. The real future. What I have been doing this week is what I should have been doing for years, and after tomorrow, there is a conversation to have about structure and role. Yes, he said, simply, without making her finish the sentence. She blinked. She had not expected it to be that easy. She had not expected him to already know. I have known for a while, Raymond said. I was waiting for you to say it directly. A pause. And in the pause, she heard something she had not heard from her father in a long time. The thing he kept compressed. The love that men like Raymond Vane expressed through action and presence, and never through the actual words, because the words felt too exposed. Come home safe tomorrow, he said. Yes, she said. She ended the call and stood for one more moment in the cold outside the warehouse, with the city moving around her and the gala 20 hours away. Then she got in the car. The Winter Syndicate Gala was held, as it had been for 23 years, in the grand ballroom of a historic hotel in the Loop. A building that had hosted presidents and criminals and the full spectrum of human ambition in between, that had absorbed every kind of significant occasion into its marble and gilt and dark wood, with the perfect democratic indifference of very old and very expensive things. Celeste arrived with Dominic at 7:45. She had spent 2 hours getting ready and had not spent any of those 2 hours negotiating with her own reflection. She had chosen a black dress structured at the shoulder, a silhouette that moved with her body rather than containing it, and she had put it on and looked at herself once, and that had been enough. She knew what she was. She knew what she was walking into. Dominic met her at the car. He looked at her the way he always looked at her, with the complete attention of someone who saw clearly and did not waste the attention on things that were not there. He offered his arm. She took it. They walked in together. The ballroom doors were open. The sound of 300 people in formal, where the accumulated noise of money and power at rest came out to meet them. And then, as they crossed the threshold, the noise diminished. Not all at once. It moved through the room in a wave conversation, dropping table by table as people turned and saw. The way sound traveled in a stone space when something significant entered it. Within 30 seconds, the orchestra was the loudest thing in the room. She kept her chin level and her hand steady on Dominic's arm, and looked across the 300 people, looking at her with the particular quality of attention her father had modeled from her childhood. The gaze that acknowledged a room without performing for it. Dominic inclined his head at someone near the door. The room began to breathe again. Conversation resumed, lower than before, with the specific undercurrent of people processing something that had just changed their understanding of the evening they were attending. She found Strand in 40 seconds. East wall, second table from the back. He had seen them come in, and what was on his face across the distance of the ballroom was the careful recalibration of a man who had arrived with a plan and was revising it in real time. He had known the announcement was coming. Everyone had known since midnight. But knowing and seeing were different things, and what he was seeing was something he had not fully accounted for. He had not accounted for what she looked like in this room. She had never been in this room before. She was vein shipping. She was ports and warehouses and logistics network, but she had never been a face that the assembled families of Chicago's invisible world had looked at and had to place on their map. She looked at Strand, held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds, then looked away. Not a challenge, not an acknowledgement. The precise calibration of someone who knew he was there and considered it noted. She moved through the room to Harlan Cross's table before dinner was served. Cross was a compact man in his late 50s, with a face built for watchfulness, and he was watching them with an expression that told her he had not yet committed to this evening in any direction. He was running a calculation. Calculations could still be interrupted. She sat down across from him without being invited, which was a choice, and she watched him register it and decide it did not merit a response. I have been learning a great deal about this city's history in the last week, she said, keeping her voice at a register that did not carry past the table, including some decisions that were made 4 years ago that I think deserved a different conversation than they received. Specifically, the Hargrove distribution reallocation and what it cost your operation. Cross's expression shifted. That was Dominic's decision. It was, and I am not here to relitigate it or to offer you something transactional. She kept her hands loose. I am here because what we are building requires knowing where the actual fracture lines are. And that one is real. Pretending it is not is what created the situation we are both in tonight. He looked at her. Strand's people came to me with information about that decision and what it cost. I know what they had. She held his gaze directly. Mr. Cross, what Strand offered you was built on Adrian Morrow's reading of a situation that Adrian Morrow had catastrophically wrong. By the end of tonight, that will be completely clear to everyone in this room. She paused. What you do before the end of tonight is what you will have to live with. The table was quiet. Cross picked up his water glass, set it down. The small, deliberate movement of a man thinking. What do you want from me? He said. Nothing tonight. Tonight I am introducing myself. She stood. What comes after tonight is a conversation for when there is no clock on it. She walked back to Dominic. At 9:40, Strand stood up. She had been waiting for it. He moved through the room with the ambient quality of ownership she had observed in their River North meeting and positioned himself near the microphone stand at the head table without taking the microphone, which was too smart. He simply stood near it, in the way that suggested invitation rather than appropriation, and the room oriented toward him with the attention of people who had been waiting for exactly this. I want to say a few words Strand said about stability, which is what this gathering has always been about at its foundation, not the food or the music, a mild sound from somewhere in the room, but the understanding we share, all of us, that stability in this city benefits everyone at this table. He was good. She had known he would be good. He moved through his opening with the ease of a man who had prepared this specific speech for a very long time. The measured appeal to shared interest, the careful positioning of himself as a reasonable voice, the gradual construction of an argument that what the room had seen the previous night was not partnership, but consolidation, not alignment, but absorption. He was 4 minutes in when Dominic stood up, not aggressively, not theatrically. He simply stood the way he had stood when she first walked into the River North restaurant 6 days ago as a thing he did. And because he was Dominic Morrow, and this was his room, in a way it had never been Strand's room, the effect was immediate. Strand's sentence did not finish cleanly. "Felix," Dominic said across the room. The register of two men who had decades of history between them compressed into a single word. "Thank you." The pause that followed had the charged quality of a room full of people who were fluent in subtext, holding their breath simultaneously. Strand looked at him. "I am not finished. You have said what you came to say." Dominic came around the table. He moved through the room and reached the front, and looked at Strand with an expression that was not hostile, not performed, simply direct. 18 years is a long time to wait for the right moment. I understand why tonight looked like that moment. Strand was very still. "It is not," Dominic said, "and I think you know that, because what you came here to challenge is not a weakened structure. You saw the announcement last night and you knew what it meant." He looked at the room. 300 faces turned. "Harlan," he said, cross at his table, went still. "Your grievance about the Hargrove reallocation was legitimate. I handled it badly. I should have come to you directly, and I did not. And what happened as a result is on me." He held Cross's eyes across the room. "I would like to correct that." The room was completely silent. Cross sat for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. A single nod. Small. Complete. Strand, standing 2 feet from Dominic, said nothing. He had understood in the last 60 seconds that the captain he had counted on was no longer counted on, that the argument he had prepared was being answered not with counter-argument, but with the thing the argument had always actually been about underneath. Whether Dominic Morrow still controlled this room. "He controlled this room," Felix Dominic said, quietly, almost privately. "Go home." A silence stretched between them long enough that the room felt every second of it. Strand looked at Dominic, then past him at Celeste, still seated at her table, watching, and what moved through his face in that moment was the complete and honest expression of a man who had waited 18 years for a window and was watching it close for the last time. He looked at Dominic. "You got lucky," he said. Yes, Dominic said, I did. Strand picked up his jacket. He looked at the room once with the expression of a man taking inventory of what he was leaving. Then he walked toward the east door. His two men followed. The door opened and closed. The room exhaled. Dominic came back to the table. He sat. He looked at his hands on the white linen and then at her. His face was composed, but the composition was doing more work than usual. She could see the full weight of the evening in him, not triumph, not relief, something more complicated and more tired than either of those. The Hargrove thing, she said quietly. That was real. It will take time. I know. He was quiet for a moment. It was a mistake. I have known it for 4 years. He paused. I needed someone to tell me to say so in the room where it mattered. She did not respond to that. Across the ballroom, Raymond Vane caught his daughter's eye. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he picked up his wine glass, barely the smallest possible gesture. She understood it. It was the most he could do in that room. It was enough. The gala ended past midnight. The marble lobby of the hotel was nearly empty by the time they came through it. A few guests still at the coat check. The hotel staff moving through their post-event work with the quiet efficiency of people who had absorbed hundreds of significant evenings into their routines and asked no questions about any of them. She was tired in a way that went past the physical, the particular exhaustion of 6 days of sustained, high-stakes attention. Her shoulders would be tense for a week. She did not try to hold herself away from it. Sousa will be slow, she said. He honored the nod tonight, but he will need time to rebuild. Yes, Strand will not come at us directly, not for a long time, but he will not disappear. No. Dominic looked at the glass doors and the city beyond them. We will need to manage the eastern routes more carefully now that we know how long he has been working them. She nodded. The Meridian clients will need to be told. Not everything, but that the documents existed and were recovered and were deleted. The ones who find out later that we knew and said nothing will never fully trust us again. The ones we tell directly, even when it is difficult, will know what kind of operation we are. She looked at him. That is the kind of operation I want to be part of building. A beat. I agree, he said. The coat check attendant brought their coats. They put them on. Outside through the glass, the car was waiting. Vasek at the door as always. She thought about what the next year would look like. The shape of the work, the Meridian conversations, the relationship with Cross that would need to be built over time rather than declared. Her father's operation and the conversation they still needed to have about structure and role. A lot of hard work. The kind that did not resolve cleanly or quickly. She did not mind hard work. Dominic held the door. She walked through it into the cold and stopped on the top step with the city spread out below, the winter air sharp against her face. The lights of the loop in every direction, and the lake somewhere beyond all of it, the black water where the city ended. And something else began. My father wants to have dinner next week, she said. He told me he would cook, which he has not done in years, which means he wants to have a real conversation about all of it, about what comes next. She glanced at Dominic. Are you prepared to sit across a table from a man who is deciding the entire time whether you are good enough for his daughter? Dominic was quiet for a moment. I have sat across from more intimidating men than your father. Not when it was personal, she said. No, he said. That is true. She almost smiled. She felt the shape of it without quite letting it happen. Some things were better held at the edge for a little while longer. I want to say something, Dominic said. She waited. He looked at the city, at the lake. When I called you 6 days ago, I told myself it was because it was the right thing to do, the honest thing. He paused. That was true. It was also true that I had been watching what Adrian was doing for months, and I was aware that he was being very stupid, not just operationally. She looked at him. I want to be clear about that, he said, because I think you deserve to know the full picture. Still, she looked at him for a moment in the cold. The city breathed around them. I know, she said. I knew by the end of the first meeting. She looked at the lake. I made every decision I made because it was the right decision, independently of anything else. I need you to know that. I know that. Good. She turned toward the steps. Then we are both clear. At the bottom of the steps, she stopped. The city was doing what it always did, indifferent and perpetual, and completely unaware of what had just shifted inside its invisible architecture. She stood in the cold with the laptop and the recovered folders, already with Dominic's people and the gala behind her and the work in front of her, and she let herself feel for exactly the length of time it took to walk from the top step to the car the accumulated weight of 6 days. The atelier, the ring, her father's office, the restaurant with Dominic and the folder and the handshake, the facility crisis and the corridor, and Adrian with the bolt cutter, and the phone call that changed his face, the Pilsen warehouse, the declaration at midnight, and now this, the lobby, the steps, the city that looked the same from the outside and was not. She had walked into an atelier 6 days ago in a wedding dress and believed at some level, beneath all the armor and competence, that she was about to be chosen in the way she had spent 30 years wanting to be chosen. She had been chosen differently, under different conditions, by someone whose opinion of her capacity she had earned rather than been given. She understood now with the bone-deep certainty that only arrived after you had tested something under real conditions, that being chosen was not the point. It had never been the point. The point was what she had demonstrated to herself in 6 days of sustained pressure. What she was when the support structures fell away and the plan collapsed, and the only thing between her and the worst outcomes was her own intelligence and nerve and willingness to keep moving forward through things that would have stopped someone built on a weaker foundation. She knew what she was made of now, not because someone had told her, because she had shown herself. She got in the car. The city moved past the windows on the way home. The familiar grid, the lights, the lake appearing and disappearing between buildings. She leaned her head back against the seat and let herself be tired, and let the tiredness be acceptable, and looked at Chicago going past this city that had always had 2 faces, the visible and the invisible, the surface and the structure. And she had spent 30 years learning to navigate between them. She was only beginning to understand how far that navigation could take her.